Phil D'Antoni came up with the story of the French Connection about two New York cops who were involved in the busting of a big heroin ring in the late 60s. No studio wanted to make it. It was turned down by every studio, including some turned it down twice. And finally, Dick Zanuck at 20th Century Fox said to us, look, he called us in, he said, I don't know what the hell this script is. I don't know what this is, but I got a feeling it could be something. He said, I've got $1.5 million hidden away in a drawer over here. If you guys can make this film for $1.5 million, go ahead and make it. Then I went home that night and I talked to Phil. I said, Phil, we can't make this film for $1.5 million. And he said, we have to tell him that we can. I said, you mean lie? He said, I wouldn't use that strong a word. Let's just go make the picture. By the time we make it, if it's made and whatever it costs, you know, what are they going to do?
The early ideas for Blue Velvet were red lips, green lawns, and the Bobby Vinton song Blue Velvet. And those kind of things just kind of sat. And one day, this man named Richard Roth called me up, and he said he wanted to take me to lunch and ask me what I wanted to do. He was a producer. So I mentioned these few impressions that were floating for Blue Velvet. And he said, that is the thing. He said, I want you to come over to Warner Brothers and we'll pitch this thing. I pitched it and they accepted it. And I wrote 2 drafts of Blue Velvet before Dune was made. And it wasn't until the 4th one that it all came together.
It wasn't a difficult picture because, first of all, I understood the character. I really felt that I had a grasp on the character of Frank Booth. And also David's direction is so, he's so in charge of his set. And at the time he was, he reminded me a little bit of Howdy Doody. He was sort of, he would say, oh, that's really good. That was really great. That was solid gold. Let's go back and do one more. He was very funny. And he used to say, now when you say that word, and I said, well, David, that word's fuck. And he said, when you say that word, I want you to, he's very funny. He's like a Boy Scout leader, very proper and so on, but he's the mind that wrote the piece.
I did American Graffiti, and I got all this feedback from people who had seen the film, how important it was to their life and what a difference it made in their life. So that kind of influenced me in terms of saying I want to trying to see if I could take the values and things from the Westerns, which were the last American mythology, and move them into a new genre, a new idea that was very contemporary, that young people would be able to relate to. And then I picked the Saturday matinee serial as my container for all this. And I took mainly the Saturday matinee serial. I added in these mythological motifs, and I made Star Wars.
I know that George had 2 3-person groups that he was thinking of that came down to the wire with. There was myself and Carrie and Mark and another group. I think it was a combination, it was an ensemble kind of casting, and I think I worked well with Carrie and Mark. The character was quite clear to me, and not too far from characters I had played before for George in American Graffiti. My only concern at the time was that those 2 characters were a bit too much alike. So we looked for opportunities to distinguish between the character that I played in Graffiti and Han Solo.
You got your reward and you're just leaving then?
That's right, yeah. Got some old debts I gotta pay off with this stuff.
Even if I didn't, you don't think I'd be fool enough to stick around here, do you? Why don't you come with us? Pretty good in a fight. Could use you.
Come on.
In those days, my agent was Sam Cohn and Arlene Donovan at ICM. Found this book by a client of hers, Avery Corman, called Kramer versus Kramer. And I said, I've never done anything like this. I don't know if I can do this sort of thing. And my wife read it and said, are you crazy? This is perfect for you. You've got it. So I still was uncertain. So I called the producer who was Stanley Jaffe, and I said, he'd asked if I would write it. And I said, yes, I would write it if Truffaut would direct it. So we contacted Truffaut. Truffaut's English was better by that point. And he read the book and said, yes, he would like to do it. He'd just done Pocket Change, and he would have been a wonderful director for it. Stanley called to say he had met with Truffaut, and they couldn't, Truffaut had another picture to do. He couldn't make the schedule work, and so he was going to go look somewhere else for a writer and director. And I said, fine, I didn't blame him. That was okay with me. And at that point, I'd gone to Europe to promote Late Show. And I was in Berlin when I got a call from Sam saying, yes, Stanley's agreed that I would write and direct Kramer. And I was extraordinarily relieved.
What we came up with after Meryl was cast, it became one line of dialogue when she gets into the elevator. After she told me at the very beginning of the movie she's leaving me. I think it's a very good moment. I said, what about Billy? Her words to that effect. Just before the door closes. She says, I'm not taking. I said, well, but you can't. In other words, I am saying the words of the audience, particularly the women in the audience. And what we had come up with, I can't remember what she says, but what we had come up with was she was leaving the kid with me because she was in such crisis that she said she could just go out, jump out the window. And she was thinking of the kid in a maternal way by leaving the kid with me. And as the elevator's closing, she says, and I don't love you anymore.
I have no patience. He's better off without me.
Joanne, please.
And I don't love you anymore.
Where are you going?
I don't know.
I called the agent and asked the agent, I said, is this guy, David Webb Peoples, available to do some writing? Because I read the script, The William Money Killings, it was called then. And the agent said, well, yeah, that's available. And I said, it's available? I thought somebody else had an option. He said, well, they just gave up the option last week. I said, oh, really? It's very interesting. So I bought it then. At that time, and I bought it and set it aside, and that was in 1981 or 82, somewhere along there. So I put it aside, decided that was a type of character I'd like to play, but down the line. Not right at that time. I thought it would be better when I was a little bit older. Then I went for another decade of doing films, and then all of a sudden, one day I thought, there's time to revisit that. So I took it out and reread it, and she said, I think I'll do this next.
Clint is another one of those directors who hires professionals. He gets a professional actor, and he stands back out of the way. What's unique about him is that you may or may not have Clint Eastwood say something to you in terms of, he won't say anything to you in terms of character, ever, nothing. He's hired you, and you're going to make that decision. I think that's because he knows that he's hired you because he's watched your work.
When he was talking back there about the time them deputies had the drop on you and Pete.
Yeah?
Well, I remember there was 3 men you shot, Will, not 2.
Oh, I ain't like that no more, Ned. Pretty Woman was another Disney picture where, once again, they had an ending where a prostitute and a rich man get together. At the end, the prostitute falls in love with the rich man. The prostitute's in her late 30s. This is her last shot at life. He had given her $3,000 to be with him. She says, "I love you, please don't go." And he says, "I gotta go." He hands her the $3,000, and she takes it, and he says, "I don't want the $3,000." And he throws it in her face. He slaps her. He knocks her down in the street. He drives away. She goes upstairs, and her roommate ODs on drugs. "Gary, we got another script here. It's a little dark at the end. Maybe you could lighten it up here." And so I came in and I looked at it, and I loved it. Jonathan Lawton, a wonderful script. Maybe it should have been a harsher script, but they hired me to not do that.
I went away for a few days to do something, and I came back. I actually didn't want to know. I didn't want to hear about reviews or anything. I was holding my breath with it. And there were lots of messages on the answering service, and I thought, you know, I'm going to pack up and leave town, and I was feeling bad for everybody, for Gary and for everybody who worked so hard. And it was a message from Gary. He says, "Hector, you better go to Westwood. Go visit the movie, a little surprise," or something to that effect. I did, and the lines were around the block. It was one of those Cinderella stories, you know.
Vivian, I have a business proposition for you.
What do you want?
I'm going to be in town until Sunday. I'd like you to spend the week with me.
Really?
Yes.
I was meeting on the cut of Sugarland with Dick Zanuck and David Brown, and I noticed this pile of papers in their secretary's office, and it said Jaws on the cover. It turned out to be galleys from the as yet unpublished novel by Peter Benchley. And I remember asking if I could read it, and Dick and David said, "Well, you can read it, but there's another director on it already." I said, "That's okay, this looks interesting." And, you know, Jaws, I thought it was a story about dental work. I didn't know, you know, it was about the ocean and the shark. So I took it to my house and I read it over the weekend, and I flipped out for it. I just went nuts, especially the last 150 pages, which was the hunt, the sea hunt for this great white leviathan, you know. And it reminded me of Duel, because Duel is about this kind of unknown force chasing this innocent bystander.
Stephen wanted to make sure that the three characters, once they got aboard the boat, Dreyfus, Shaw, and myself, were sympathetic, that the audience could understand them and what getting the shark meant to each one of them. And we built our performances on that. So the things that we created together, the stuff on the nose, the glasses, the being frightened of water, not trusting the other two guys, thinking that I could shoot the shark. I mean, he was an everyman. He was the audience aboard that boat, and the audience certainly didn't think that I would be the one who was going to kill the shark, because I just was incapable of doing it. But that's what made the story fun.
And I was on the phone with Mike Medavoy, who was the head of production at that point, and it's again a conversation I can remember very clearly. Mike said, "I want you to read a book that I'm going to send over to you. It's called The Silence of the Lambs. After you finish reading it, if you still want to make the road rage movie with the district attorney, fine, we'll make it. However, I hope that you like this book enough to say that you want to do that. And at the moment, Ted Talley's working on a screenplay, and it'll be ready soon." So I said, "Okay, terrific." So I got a copy of the book and read one of the great American novels, and called Mr. Medavoy back immediately and said, yes, yes, yes. And I didn't even feel I needed to read the screenplay. The book was so rich, so extraordinary. I knew there'd be a great movie in it.
After the first day of working with him, Jody came walking up to me. She said, "I don't like this guy." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "He's too nice. Nobody's really like that. He's trying to con a performance out of me or get something out of me. Nobody's really like that." And I said, "You know what? I've known Jonathan for a long time. He really is that person." And I said, "You're going to figure that out if you know, a day or two from now or a week from now. And when you do, buy me dinner." And I remember 2 or 3 days later, I was in my hotel room in Pittsburgh, and phone rings. and it's Jody, and she says, Scott, I'm a gourmet cook, so I want you to come over to my apartment, you know, tomorrow night, and this is what I'm fixing you. She said, you know, you were right. He really is truly one of the nicest guys of all time.
I've been in this room for 8 years now, Clarice. I know they will never ever let me out while I'm alive. What I want is a view. I want a window where I can see a tree or even water.
I thought, well, you have someone who's autistic, and so therefore, and they're in a car with a guy who's a salesman and a con artist and a manipulator and a wheeler dealer, and he can't do any of those things to the person sitting next to him. He can't con, he can't use any of those things that he knows how to do. You know, Raymond can't be changed. He doesn't pay attention to most things. There's no conversation that's going on. And so that it comes back, and then you deal with yourself maybe for the very first time in life in a 3-day journey across country. And so to really strip away all of the other storytelling devices and adventures that may happen or anything else and just put two people into a car and let the movie really rest on their shoulders as we make this journey, I thought would be kind of interesting.
I was in the car in that wonderful Buick convertible with Tom Cruise, and they had to put a camera in the car and a light, and they told us to, you know, we sit there, there's no director, we start driving, and you go like this in front of the camera, you turn something, but you have two-way radio, you turn it on, you go, you clack stick with your hands, and you start acting. And Barry said, if you run out, just go again or improvise. So many times I would say, yeah. And Barry said, why don't you just try that? Whenever you are worried during a take, just go there, quote. And it was brilliant direction, because that's what I did in there, and I was home free.
Would you look at that? 1957 Studebaker Golden Hawk. 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds. 275 supercharged horsepower into that hood. That's beautiful.
Of course, I'm an excellent driver.
You know how to drive?
Yeah.
When did you drive?
Of course, I drove the Buick on the driveway when my dad came to Walbrook.
Was Dad in the car? Was Dad in the car, Ray?
Yeah.
I was offered 2 or 3 times, in fact, by Dawn Steele, who was passionate about Flashdance. She was desperate to make it, and I just didn't like the story. I thought it was kind of dumb. I wasn't crazy about it, and I turned it down a couple of times, maybe 3, which was sort of difficult for me to do, because I could tell that they were going to spend the $8 million on the movie. And so finally I said yes, and I suppose it shows that you should have an open mind, really. You know, I think it's very dangerous sort of waiting and waiting and waiting for the perfect movie to appear. I thought, well, you know, maybe I can make the dances interesting.
They didn't have somebody come in and double for me. They had 4 people come in and double, because if I couldn't do something, then I had one dance double. If she couldn't do it, then you had another person. If that person couldn't do it, then there was a gymnast that came in. I mean, there was a young boy who did some of the dancing, you know, and the poor thing had to shave his legs and put on a little leotard. It was very embarrassing for him.
I had an idea that I wanted to do a wet dance. And so I remember trying to show the studio heads, and it was in a sort of a rehearsal studio, and there were sort of bleachers there, and all of the studio heads were at the top of these bleachers, and I was down at the bottom with Jeffrey Hornaday and this poor girl, and I had a hose pipe, and I was kind of winding the hose pipe around this girl, and all I could see was this desperate skepticism on their faces, and that they were doomed, that the movie was in the toilet, you know.
Born on the 4th of July was finally made with Cruise stepping in to work for no money. Universal insisted he work for no money, as I would, and make the film at a very tough budget, which we barely did, and then we went back for more money at the end, and they gave it to Tom and I, but it wasn't a lot, and it was ultimately an $18, $19 million movie.
There's times when you read a character and you know this is a role that I can't wait to play. I read the script and I got halfway through and I had to put it down. It was just just to take a break for about 20 minutes. I found it so moving. And I finished and I called Paula Wagner, my agent at the time, and Oliver afterwards. I said, listen, I want to make this film. I deeply want to make this film.
It was my concept to make it into an anamorphic movie, big scale, a Norman Rockwell frieze of America. So I wanted to do the boyhood of Ronnie, which we ended up cutting down considerably for the length reasons, but became a hero to me, another kind of hero. He wanted to be the conventional hero, and he became a real hero, and he paid a real price, as you know. And he became a hero just to speak out, to write that book, to speak at the convention. The revelation was his victory. And to be honored at the Democratic Convention like that was a highlight of his life, I believe, as well as the movie, too.
What do you have to say to these people?
My name is Ron Kovic. I'm a Vietnam veteran. My name is Ron Kovic. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm here tonight to say that this war is wrong, that this society lied to me, it lied to my brothers.
We had the idea for Airplane way back when, in the early 70s when we were doing the Kentucky Fried Theater. And we used to leave the videotape recorder on overnight, and just to catch the late movies and try to get the commercials so we could redub them or spoof them in some way. And we would look at it in the morning and see what we had gotten the night before. And one night we found that we had a bunch of commercials, but we were more interested in the movie that surrounded these commercials, which was called 0 Hour. It's a 1957 movie starring Dana Andrews, Linda Darnell, and Sterling Hayden, and one of these airliner in trouble movies. And at that time, we were experiencing the Universal Pictures series of airport movies. And so we thought this would be a great idea to do a spoof of these airliner in trouble movies.
We have the three guys, Jim Abrams and Jerry and David Zucker, and they're functioning as directors. And anything funny that happened off stage, it would go into the picture, because so there's this you can't say what were those outtakes must have been something. I say there were no outtakes; they're in the picture.
Starts with a slight fever, dryness of the throat. As the virus penetrates the red blood cells, the victim becomes dizzy, begins to experience an itching, a rash. From there, the poison goes to work on the central nervous system, causing severe muscle spasms, followed by the inevitable drooling. At this point, the entire digestive system collapses.
I didn't like the script of MASH at all, but I had been working for about 4 years previous to that on a project for a film called The Chicken and the Hawk, which was about World War I flying, and which I never got done. But when I read the MASH script, I thought, I can do a lot of the stuff I wanted to do in a style that I wanted to use in Chicken and the Hawk in MASH. So I said, okay, I'll do this.
MASH was a project that I understood nobody really wanted to do, and A-list people or whatever. And it was purely Bob Altman's vision. I'll never forget when the picture was shown to Ring Lardner Jr. And a lot of us were there. And Ring Lardner came out and walked over to us and said, "How could you do this to me? Not a word that I wrote is on screen." And of course, Mr. Lardner went on to win the Academy Award that year for the best screenplay.
Oh, Father Mulcahy, I'd like you to meet Captain Pierce, our new surgeon. This is a Catholic chaplain, and his Captain Forrest.
They go red.
They go red. Captain Waldowski, our dental officer. This is Captain Black, our anesthesiologist.
I got you.
I'm the dentist here.
Oh, I'm John Black.
I'll be passing gas for you.
Welcome.
And one day I was at home and my phone rang, and a man was on the other end with an accent, and he said, "My name is Alexander Salkind. Do you know who I am?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you know Superman?" I said, "Of course I know Superman." He said, "Well, we're producing it, and my director is no longer going to be on the picture, and we'd like you to do it. And I'm sending you the script." And he said, "I'm going to pay you a lot of money." And I said, "Oh, really?" He He says, we're doing 2 pictures, I'm going to pay you $1 million. What? $1 million? I mean, that was a license plate. I mean, that was like somebody using the expression, all the tea in China when you were a kid. And I mean, my heart was going through my chest, and before I hung up practically, there was a knock on the door and the script was there. And it was 500 pages. Two screenplays.
Hey, Jim! Whoa! Excuse me. That's a bad outfit! Whoa!
The idea for Do the Right Thing came from several places. Number one, just living here in New York and seeing the racial animosity, the tension. When I was growing up, I think I saw One Step Beyond or Twilight Zone or something about this. The specifics of the show were very vague, but it was about the scientist was doing a study that said after 95 degrees the murder rate went up. And then he's looking at a thermometer throughout the show, and it goes up and he gets murdered himself. So I got this idea, you know, let's have one block in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the hottest day of the summer, have a group of different ethnic groups, which really reflects the city as a whole, and see what happens, you know, on the hottest day of the summer. So that's basically how that film came about.
I would agree with the critics that it was a major piece, and that it placed Spike in proper context with the rest of what American directors were doing at that time. He not only shocked Hollywood, he also shocked people in the black establishment too. We were a little concerned about biting the hand that feeds us. Well, Spike didn't mind biting the hand. He knew how to bite, but not as far as the bone.
Yo, Mook! Mookie!
What?
Come you got no brothers up on the wall?
Man, ask Sal, right?
Hey, Sal, how come you got no brothers up on the wall here?
You want brothers on the wall? Get your own place. You can do what you want to do.
John Cassavetes was the one who pushed me into making Mean Streets. He had seen Boxcar Bertha, and he took me in his office and embraced me and said, "You did a nice job." He says, "But you just spent almost a year of your life making something that's not good." He said, "Ultimately, it's not good." He said, "You know, if you have something like Who's That Knocking, do you have another project?" I said, "Yeah, I've been working on it for a few years called Mean Streets, called Season of the Witch at the time." He said, "Well, go in there, rewrite the script, and get it done. Don't make genre films." He said, "Just don't make genre films." I learned. I said, "Okay." You know, I thought it was a fairly good genre picture. I just didn't. Maybe I'm just not made to function in that world. I guess I wanted to be like an old genre director, but I was more attracted to the European cinema, and I think he saw that.
Why didn't you make your payment last Tuesday?
What do you mean? I made my payment last Tuesday. What are you talking about?
You paid him last week?
Yeah, I paid him last week. Well, what did he say? He said I didn't pay him? He's a fucking liar. Where is he?
You paid him?
Yeah, I paid him.
Last week?
Yeah.
Last Tuesday?
Yeah. Charlie, you don't know what
He's here.
Where?
Out front.
He's here?
Yeah.
So what do I care?
The history of Nightmare on Elm Street is kind of interesting. I read a newspaper article in the LA Times about an immigrant, a recent immigrant to the United States, a young man who had complained to his parents about severe nightmares. I think they were from Cambodia. And he was assured that nightmares were, you know, not that unusual. He shouldn't be so afraid. And he started staying up and refusing to sleep. And the family became very concerned, and they sought the help of a doctor. The doctor prescribed sleeping pills. The young man apparently took them, and in the end it turned out he did not. He was taking them and putting them aside. He had a coffee pot in his room after a while to stay awake. And nobody knew quite what to do. At one point, he was downstairs watching television in the middle of the night, and he fell asleep, and his family noticed finally that he was asleep, and they brought him up to his bed. The whole family went to bed themselves, thinking, thank God, finally he's sleeping. Heard screams an hour later, ran into his room, he was thrashing in his bed. By the time they got to him, he was dead. So I wrote it and thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, and then spent 3 years trying to get somebody to fund it. And I have a wonderful drawer full of letters saying, this is not scary, this is stupid, nobody will ever like this.
The idea of the nightmare, the bad dream is universal, and then Wes's sort of exploitation of that with special effects in a kind of a surrealistic nature I think that audiences worldwide had seen enough surrealism from Hollywood, back as far as Salvador Dali working for, you know, film noirs in the late 40s and all of the sort of MGM musical surrealistic numbers that we had in the early 50s, that audiences knew how to look at a kind of cinematic surrealism. And here was Wes using it in a low-budget horror movie, almost as the villain along with me. It was certainly what I was creating, Freddie was creating, and I think that's really the reason these films sort of captured an international audience. You know, the bad dream, the nightmare, and then this use of surrealism as sort of the means to express it.
It was being developed by a couple of friends of mine for Adrian Lyne to direct. And he had just finished making a movie called 9.5 Weeks, and I think he wanted to take about 6 months off, and he didn't want to direct. And so they were now looking for somebody else, and they gave me the script and said, there's something missing in this film, and we can't figure out what it is. Maybe you can. They didn't give it to me for me to direct. They gave it to me as a friend. Can you help us figure out how to make this film work? But I said to them, I said, you know, this is something that appeals to me because the tone of this thing is completely in sync with my tone and the way I, look at life and the way I feel about theater, which is there's a humor and a drama to everything. And it was very scary to me because it was the first time that I was saying, this is who I am, this film represents the kind of film that I like to make, and if it's not successful, it'll invalidate who I am. If it is successful, it'll validate who I am separate and apart from my father. And thank God it was successful.
I think that his experience as an actor is one of the major factors that allows him to go between When Harry Met Sally and Misery. But he's able to get amazing, completely real, believable, timeless, flawless, beautiful, wonderful performances out of his actors and make a movie that is just gorgeous to watch, you know? And I think it is his experience as an actor that lets him do that.
All right. Mickey's a mouse, Donald's a duck, Pluto's a dog. What's Goofy? If I can only have one food for the rest of my life, that's easy. Pez. Cherry flavored Pez. No question about it.
Goofy's a dog. He's definitely a dog.
I wanted to write a story about a guy who had been tossed out of his kingdom, but still had to work in that kingdom. And who's really there for you? Who's truly your friend? Usually you find in a situation like that the people you least expected were your friends. The ones you depended on the most weren't. And that's Jerry Maguire. That was the beginning of Jerry Maguire. How do you tell that story? I started to build this story, and once again, it took 4 years to do the story, cast it, and make the movie. But it is the closest that anything I've ever done has come to really nailing the way it sounded and felt when I wrote it. And the movie delivers the feeling that was my original intention.
When I read the script, I just thought, what a unique structure, what a unique character, and it ended up being one of the great experiences of my professional life. He gave me confidence to play that character and really directed me into what I feel some territory that I hadn't been before. That's the exciting thing, working with him. And also, he's not afraid to explore his own scenes and change them, and it's that contribution. As an actor, I'm trying to bring the director's solutions and understand what he wants and find my way with the character. And then there's always that moment where you discover the character for yourself in a way that it's like, I know this guy, I know how to play this guy, and I love doing his stuff, and I just have just a natural affinity for his material.
Here it is. Show me the money.
Jerry, does that make you feel good just to say that? Say it with me one time, Jerry.
Show you the money.
Oh, no, you can do better than that, Jerry. I want you to say it what you would mean it, bro.
Jim Brooks came in one day and said, here's your next film, who was a friend of mine. And I read it. And honestly, it read like an afternoon special to me. It was very sweet. The universal subject, when I'm big, I'm gonna. I didn't know everyone had turned it down. I didn't know there were 4 other projects with the exact same premise at the time. And when I found out, I said, well, let's not do this. Let's do something else. And I didn't know what a green light, a go movie, it's hard to get. I didn't know. It was rather innocent and stupid.
Penny said a really smart thing in the, very early on in the making of Big. We hadn't even started shooting the film yet. I think we were probably still in casting, and we were talking about one thing or another. And she said, "We got to be real here." That it was never about kooky and cute behavior for the sake of kooky and cute behavior. It was literally, how would a kid approach having a loft and having a girlfriend and having a job at a toy company when in fact he's only 13 years old.
When it first came to me, I had a tough time seeing myself doing it. I didn't like it. It was in a different form when it first came to me, and I just didn't think I was the right director for it. It seemed to me to be too much of one joke over and over and over when I first looked at it. Every time I would say no, they would wait a week or so, and then they would ask me again. And then finally, my agent again, Michael Ovitz, said, look, why don't you work with Dustin and Larry Gelbart, the writer, for a week? And if at the end of the week you still don't want to do it, then fine. But working that week with Dustin and Larry, we were able to come up with an approach that made me feel like it could be a little more than a silly comedy. It could be a comedy, but it could also be about something. It could have an idea at its center which would prevent it from being the same joke over and over. And so I committed to do it, and that's precisely what we worked on.
I was trying to produce this film called Thelma Louise, and I kept going around all these guys saying, what about this, what about you, whatever. And most of the guys said, I got a problem with the women. I said, well, that's the whole point, you dope, okay? So next, I'd move on to somebody else. And after seeing 5 people, I thought, well, you know what, this is crazy. I'm talking myself into doing it. So I talked myself into doing the film. And I'm glad I did, because, and I think the only reason I hesitated into not doing it was because it was going down that route of, you know, small scale logistics, 2 gals and their journey. But I guess I'm able to put my stamp on that kind of personal story, because I saw if this is the last journey, it better be a tremendous one. So I lent whatever I do to that, and that was actually really very successful.
After the first actor fell through, I auditioned, and I knew what this thing was. I mean, I recognized that this was something pretty extraordinary for me, especially. And then I didn't hear anything for a month, and I thought, oh boy, that's a shame. But I'll find it somewhere else. I'll find something else. And they were on to this to a second actor who, for whatever reason, that didn't work out. I don't remember why. And got a call in again, and went and read, and then read the second day with Gina, and that went quite well. And then I didn't hear anything for a week, but I felt pretty good about it. And then I got the call, and 3 days later I was on set and working. That was Ridley taking the chance on me. because they had more well-known actors positioned for the thing. And that was Gina as well, giving her okay and taking a shot up with me.
Then I just kind of waltz on in, and I say, ladies, gentlemen, let's see who wins the prize for keeping their cool. Simon says, everybody down on the floor. Now, nobody loses their head, then nobody loses their head. You, sir. Yeah, you do the honors. Take that cash, you put it in that bag right there. You got an amazing story to tell your friends. If not, well, you got a tag on your toe. You decide.
Jerry saw my commercial reel, Jerry Burkham saw my commercial reel, and they were looking for a director for Top Gun, and I had the spot with a jet, a Vingen jet, which is built by the Swedes, racing with a car. Yeah. And I think that was the only footage around other than Howard Hawks, you know, which involved airplanes that had any sort of juice to it. Yeah. So I think based on that, they were sort of, the pickings were slim, and so they offered me Top Gun, or gave me Top Gun. Well, actually, Top Gun was, I closed the deal on Top Gun because I did a river trip with another story, Hollywood story, with all the boys Simpson and Katzenberg and Bruckheimer, and that was the early days. We did this river trip through the Grand Canyon, and I swam the biggest rapids in the Grand Canyon as a bet in order to get Top Gun, and that closed the deal. Yeah, so Simpson said, if you swim these rapids, which were, what do they call them, stage 5, I'll give you the movie. So I did, and that was the true story.
Top Gun has become an icon film for kids of all ages. I was just recently told that the #1 graduate at Annapolis happened to be a woman last year, and when she was asked, why did you join the Navy, and she said, I saw Top Gun. So it's kind of interesting how it affects people even today, and she is I guess in her early 20s, to decide to go on to a military career based on a movie that we created back in the 80s. Very interesting how those things happen, and you know, it was Tony's vision of that movie that made it the success that it has become.
All right, talk to me, Goose. He's still back there. He's closing in on us. He's closing fast.
You can run, kid, but you can't hide.
Jester, see if I can give you a run for your money here.
I was in Japan promoting public access at the Tokyo Sundance Festival. And they have a division that goes to Japan and presents independent films there. And I felt that since we did so right by the Japanese company that financed public access by winning the Sundance Film Festival with the movie that we made with their money, maybe they'd come up with maybe $2 or $3 million so we could make a more legitimate, more commercial feature. And Chris had been online, Chris McQuarrie, who wrote Usual Suspects, had been online at a film at Sundance prior, when we had won, and with an actor, mutual actor friend of ours named Dylan Cussman, and they were joking about how a really great idea for a movie would be a movie called The Usual Suspects, and they would have a poster of 5 guys in a lineup. And it would be about a bunch of criminals who meet in a lineup. And they would all be really tough and really interesting, and the tagline would be, all of you can go to hell. And we thought that was cool. And from that point on, we took it through draft after draft, took it through about 9 drafts, as I recall, over the course of 6 months, until we were ready to go out with the script. And then when we felt confident in it, we sent it to about 25 different companies that I had become acquainted with, production companies, through the making of and the exposure of public access. And all of them passed. All of them rejected Usual Suspects. It was very frustrating. One company, this British producer named Robert Jones, believed in the script, understood it, brought in some German financing. We got up and running. We made offers to actors. Kevin Spacey, about a year earlier, had seen public access and was introduced to me at a screening and said that he would like to work with me based on that.
The only stuff that was improv was really the gaffes and the hilarity that this particular group of guys had around each other and the effect that we had on each other. The prime example being when we shot the lineup scene. Gabriel was the first to go after Fenster, Benicio, began to speak his lines of dialogue, because we literally had no idea what he was saying, and he was saying it with such conviction, and
I mean, we knew what it said in the script, but what he was saying didn't resemble it at all. And Gabriel snorted. I remember that we were all standing in line being quite serious, and Gabriel snorted like a horse after Benicio spoke, and that just literally opened the floodgates. And then Brian did a brilliant thing, which is that he took it and he used it, and he took our hilarity and our little unrelenting unprofessionalism that day, and he incorporated it into the film and created in literally one scene a camaraderie between this group of guys that I think established their relationship for the rest of the film. I think an audience just immediately identified with how funny it was.
All right, you all know the drill. When your number is called, step forward and repeat the phrase you've been given. Understand? Number 1, step forward.
Hand me the keys, you fucking cocksucker.
There's a really sort of perversely amusing thing in Hollywood where if you don't want the job, they're willing to throw more money at you to say yes. If you do want the job, it's because your passion's there. Well, you don't charge extra for the passion. You know, wouldn't you, if you're going to hire somebody, wouldn't you want somebody who's really enthusiastic about what you want made? That's kind of how I think, but not in Hollywood all the time. It's very strange. So no, I didn't direct again for 5 years until Steve King called me up one day and mentioned The Green Mile to me, and that's how that got triggered. Well, in the case of The Green Mile, I think the greatest challenge was really getting the key elements of the story in, getting that sprawling Stephen King tapestry of characters and narrative into a manageable length. That really was the biggest challenge there. Again, I've always felt that if you take a piece of material that you love, and there are some books that I just am nuts about, I won't touch them, because I know that by the time I finish adapting them, they're going to be either 6 hours long, which is completely unworkable, or I will have been forced to truncate them to the point where it's not even the same story anymore. It's not the same animal anymore. I've just cut the legs off some beautiful beast, and it's crippled now, you know. I think Green Mile was just on the borderline of that in terms of the amount of story I had to tell. I think it's okay to tell a 3-hour, a story in 3 hours. It's not something you want to do every day. And contrary to popular myth, that's the only time I've ever made a 3-hour movie. But that was the biggest challenge there. It was really compressing everything without mutilating it. You know, getting everything that was really vital in without crossing that line.
The screenplay read almost like a graphic novel would. You could see every frame, you could see every face, you could see every moment played out, and it was for that reason I think it was truly the best example. It was probably the best screenplay I'd ever read, just by the fact that what was on the page totally reflected what ended up being on the screen. There was almost no dilution of the artistic sensibilities from one to the other.
What do you want, John Coffey?
Just to help.
With Titanic, for me, it started with history, and from history, I extracted the story that I thought best told that history. Now, this is not necessarily obvious, especially to history buffs, because there have been, 12 or 13 previous films about Titanic that seem to be much more historically accurate in the sense that they only had in the content of the film historically known things, as opposed to grafting in fictional elements. But my feeling was that, yes, they're fine films and rather ploddingly pedantic, and they don't involve me. because the liberties that would have to be taken with historical fact to involve me in the kind of passionate story that I wanted to tell would be too offensive from a historical standpoint, because it didn't really happen to those people. It may have happened to somebody that died and we don't know about it, but then it becomes fiction because we don't know about it. So I thought, okay, fine, let's tell a story that might have happened, that does not in any way violate historical fact by doing something that could not have happened, that was mutually exclusive with what was reported. Let's do the story of somebody who could have been on the ship who died and we never heard their story. And in the process, we're going to learn a lot of history, but we're going to have the added bonus of a real sense, subjective sense that you are really there.
I think he really not only understands the technical side of how to make something look unbelievable, but he, you know, throughout all his films, he's really had a lot of concentration on performances too, you know. But at the same time, he's extremely demanding. And all of a sudden I see Jim on a crane going up with the whole night sky, going another 100 feet in the air with his camera sort of leaning over like this with a camera right above me, and I'm looking up at him, and I just ask myself, how did I get here? What sort of turns did I make in my life to be here at this present moment, looking like, just looking at that whole situation was completely surreal. It was completely bizarre.
Come on!
I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And there was no more sea.
After I did This Is My Life, after I was just finishing it, I was having what you would call a cash flow problem. And I said to my agent, could you get me a rewrite? And the script that landed in my lap was Sleepless in Seattle, which was a movie that had a director attached to it. It even had a cast attached to it, and they were trying to just get, you know, someone to come in and do 3 weeks of work and make it work. And so I read it and I needed the money, and I thought, well, I'll do this. And so I did it, and then it sort of had this kind of strange explosion because everybody really loved it except the director, who withdrew from it, leaving it directorless. And the actress who was meant to be in it, who would have been disastrously wrong for it, and at least had the brains to know that she was. So she withdrew. And there it was, suddenly this project that was up for grabs, and so I got to do it. But I didn't rewrite it thinking I was ever going to do it at all.
When we were shooting Sleepless in Seattle, I think we all had a sense that it was an incredibly elegant and simple film at a time when that's a priceless commodity in order to get to make a film by, to get on film, elegance and simplicity. I think it came about because of the supreme logic of what the idea was, but also Nora's, I want to say, like, novelist's vision of how a story plays out in everybody's head. There's a minimum of things that you need to get, but those things are of maximum importance. So it wasn't. I don't think we ever belabored, you know, a long projected scenes, but at the same time, there was an exactness that went into every one of these scenes as we played them out.
Sam, tell me what was so special about your wife.
Well, how long is your program? Oh, well, it was a million tiny little things. That when you added them all up, it just meant that we were supposed to be together.
I think one of the reasons they offered the film to me was they wanted Robin to play Perry, and I think they'd sat down and gone through the list of directors he had worked with that he liked and discovered they were all working except for me. And so when the script arrived, one of my jobs was to convince Robin to do it. And that was the first thing I did. And I thought it'd be fantastic, and he was a friend and great. And then I felt I really wanted an actor that would ground him, because I was frightened that Robin and me together would just fly off into madness and silliness. And I was looking for, basically I was looking for like a young Jack Nicholson, because the character had to be really fast talking and snappy and cynical and sharp. And the last person I was thinking of course, was Jeff Bridges, because Jeff was laconic, and he was, and I was on a plane flying across the States, and Baker Boys was on. I saw him and said, oh, he can do it, he'd be fantastic. And I couldn't wait to get off the plane to telephone and said, get in touch with Jeff. And for me, that was what was interesting, working to try to ground myself, to not do my cheap tricks, not to be get away with a cheap gag, but to ground it in reality and in solidness. And Jeff did that job. And I think what was important was that Jeff and Robin got on so well, and they both sort of watched each other and learned from each other, and they were a perfect balance.
Nice to have company. Hi.
Where are my shoes?
What?
Where?
What?
What?
Shh, shh. What is it? I got company. What? I knew it. I knew it last night. I did too. I did. Don't look at me. Don't. He's the one.
I had met my lawyer's wife. Was a very good friend of ours, and he was just starting to write on her own. She was writing speculatively for television, but I thought she was very funny. And I said to her, when I was making Body Heat, let's write a movie together. She was shocked. She had never thought about movies or written movies. But when I finished Body Heat, Barbara Benedict was her name, and I sat down and wrote The Big Chill. I thought it would be enormous fun. It was meant to be a serious comedy. And that's how it turned out. Barbara was enormously influential on the tone of the piece. It was an extraordinary experience for a bunch of young actors, and for me, it was my second film.
He cherished this group of friends that the movie was a bit based on, I gather, and wanted to kind of recreate that that group in a way, and he, in a very sincere and passionate way, at one point I remember said, if I can direct you to be a certain way with each other, please be kind with each other and considerate and cooperative and kind. It was miraculous and magical, in large part due to his, his birthing of it and the direction of it.
And one of our best friends has decided to kill himself, and we don't have a fucking clue as to why.
You never know why anyone does anything. I don't know why I chose these socks this morning.
Oh, there's a great equation. Your socks, Alex's death.
They're pretty sad socks.
I believe the old theory that everybody does everything in order to get laid.
Who said that, Freud?
Well, I got offered Batman after Pee-wee, but it wasn't greenlit until actually the first weekend after Beetlejuice opened. I mean, again, another reality. Early on, you get snippets of the reality of the movie business, which is that, yeah, they may want you to do it. It sounds like a good idea, and we think you're talented, but unless you're successful, we don't know if we want to give, So I think that even though they wanted me to do it, they saw that I, had talent or whatever that they felt comfortable with. But, the reality is, yeah, it'll be greenlit if this is a success, and you might have more trouble. We might have to look at this again if it's not. I mean, when they first offered it to me, I was like, yeah, great. I mean, I wasn't necessarily a huge comic book fan, but I was a big Batman fan, and of any comic, I sort of thought, well, this is the one that I gravitate to most. Just the psychological profile of the characters and the depth of them. I felt they had more depth than a lot of other characters in comic books somehow.
He saw me
do something, and he couldn't exactly explain why he liked it or how he liked it, but he'd add something onto it, he'd throw something into the mix, and then I'd take that idea and I'd incorporate it, and then I'd do something else, and he'd see it and then adjust it, take the camera and adjust to it, or reset the shot, because he'd get another idea. He'd see what I was doing and say, oh wow, then if you're going to do that, we can do this. When that starts to happen, there's a kind of freedom that ain't like anything else. It's like nothing else. And that doesn't come along too often. So I was fortunate to connect with this guy.
Hold on.
My attitude about Apollo 13 changed from the time that I committed to making it to the time that we actually began filming it, and I'll explain that. At the beginning, I approached it sort of for the same reasons that I approached Backdraft. Wow, this is a great cinematic challenge. I can use today's technology to really allow the audience to feel what it must be like to be in a spacecraft. That'll be interesting. I have no idea how we'll do it, but that's a great challenge. I'm a proponent of the space program. It'll be interesting to kind of salute the space program. But then as I started doing the research, and particularly one day when I went to the actual mission control room and met with a bunch of the mission control room veterans, the flight controllers, I started to understand what the experience was like, not only for the astronauts, but for the people on the ground, that it was life or death for them in a very, very personal way. And unlike a kind of a war situation, it was much more like a sort of a battlefield medical unit. You know, that the mission controllers had a huge personal investment in not losing this patient. And I began to understand the whole movie in much more personal and heroic terms.
Let's forget any of the space stuff. I mean, just from an editing standpoint, he shot all of Mission Control. And then afterwards, that lasted for, a month or two, afterwards went on to shoot the capsule stuff. And all the time while shooting Mission Control, he had to be keeping in his head the way that the shots were going to cut into stuff that he wasn't going to shoot until months later. And he was going to shoot it, and it was really kind of a mystery at that time, how we were going to move the camera around inside this little capsule and how that was going to work. And that in itself is a tremendous accomplishment, because the power of the drama and the way that the camera moves in Mission Control and then brings you outside into the capsule. On top of that, he had to include what he was going to do with miniatures and exteriors of the capsule.
Hey, we've got a problem here.
What did you do?
Nothing. I stirred the tanks.
Whoa. Hey.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
I remember distinctly reading the screenplay and not being able to, Eric Roth's screenplay, and not being able to stop reading it. I mean, I mean, like all screenplays, when you read the first draft, they've got problems, and it's never, I mean, I've never done a movie with a screenplay where you could actually just shoot it, without working on it. So it had problems, and it had, holes in it and things, but it was so compelling. And I just was reading it, and I couldn't figure out why, because it didn't have any typical movie conventions in it. It didn't have, a ticking bomb. It didn't have a villain. It didn't have, they weren't chasing after the diamond. I mean, it was like there didn't seem to be any compelling dramatic conflict to keep me so interested in it, and I realized it was just, I wanted to find out, the true suspense of the movie was to find out what was going to happen to this character. And I couldn't stop reading it. And whenever that happens, I know that's a major signal, you know, that that's a pretty good piece of material. And so, I mean, I read it and I said I wanted to do it.
When we were shooting the park bench scenes in Forrest Gump, in which Forrest is sitting there, we don't know who this guy is, we don't know what his story is, and it unfolds. We were shooting it over the course of 3 days, actually 2.5 days. After a while, you know, it just got dizzying. It's going to rain now. So I saw there's like pictures from the unit photographer of me and Bob sitting on this bench together, and Bob is always smiling. Bob's always like, and I'm sitting there usually with my finger in my eye, and you know, with my hands around a cup of coffee, because I'm asking, Bob, is any of this working? I mean, is any of this stuff making sense? And Bob would say to me, who knows? I mean, you know, but honestly, Bob, I mean, when the lady came in, do you feel as though we're actually having a conversation, or is it just me picking? I mean, is it going to be like episodic, or is it going to be like a true connection between these people? I don't know. It's a minefield, Tom. It's a friggin' minefield. Who knows? We can kill ourselves any given day on a movie like this, and that's, you know, and that's really, and I think oddly enough, he gets this perverse enjoyment out of that very knowledge.
Hello. My name's Forrest Gump. Do you want a chocolate? I could eat about 1.5 million of these.
My daughter Eleanor read the book and she said, "You got it, Dad, you should think about doing this movie." I read the book and I fell in love with it. And I called my agent, I said, "I'd love to do Harry Potter." And my agent says, "Yeah, well, so would every other director in town, including Steven Spielberg, who's probably going to do it." So I said, "Okay, I'll forget about it." I started writing another script, actually. And then about 3 months later, for some reason, Spielberg dropped out. And as Warner Brothers said, or the trade paper said, the bake-off began. And suddenly Warner Brothers was interviewing everyone, all of these directors. I remember getting the script in the mail, and I went to the computer, and I started rewriting it. No one knew I was doing that. And I called my agent the next day, and I said, "Look, I need you to get me the last meeting. I want all these other directors to go in first. I want the last meeting." I spent 10 days rewriting the entire script. Not greatly, just basically putting some stuff back in the book and making it a little more, not visual, but I wanted the studio to understand why I wanted to do this movie and the type of movie I wanted to do. So I finished the script, and I flew to Los Angeles, and I met with the studio, and they said, "Well, why do you want to do the movie?" I said, "I just feel incredibly strongly about it. I can see the movie. I had a visual idea for the movie." And I put the script down, and I said, I've rewritten the script, you know, free of charge, no strings attached. I just wanted you guys to see what I would do with the movie. And 2 weeks later, I got the job.
I demand that you leave at once, sir. You are breaking and entering. Dry up, Dursley, you great prune. Mind, I haven't seen you since you was a baby, Harry, but you're a bit more along than I would have expected, particularly round the middle.